Good morning, City Life. I am so excited to be here with you this morning on this really amazing day that we get to celebrate Palm Sunday and our first post-COVID water baptisms all in the same day. It is going to be so much fun, so much fun. If I haven't had the chance to meet you yet, my name is Leah, and I love celebrating this time of year. Participating in this Rise fast throughout Lent has been so good because I don't know if you experience this at all, but I know sometimes for me, when I become really familiar with something, sometimes I can fail to really appreciate, right, what it means, or maybe even what it means to somebody who's not really familiar with something. So I experienced this in a funny way a couple weeks ago in our family. So Pastor Jen was taking my two oldest girls, Gabby and Claire, to a birthday party with her oldest daughter, Rosie. And so they were in the car, and the conversation shifted to probably a pretty typical tween girl conversation, all about cute boys, okay? So specifically celebrity cute boys and which one was cuter than the other. So because they couldn't come to a consensus, they had to consult a very neutral third party of Google. So they went and started searching on their phones to find out, what the Google population thought of these boys. And while they were doing so, Gabby started finding out some interesting facts about each one. And so she's looking and she's like, oh my gosh, Joe Jonas is worth $50 million? That's amazing. And Pastor Jen said she noticed that Claire had a little bit of a confused look on her face, but Gabby just kept talking, and she's like, oh my word, Miley Cyrus is worth $160 million? That is just not right. That is crazy. That is not right. And finally, Claire she couldn't take it anymore, and she said, no, Gabby, I will tell you what's not right. It's not right that you can buy a celebrity for a certain amount of money if you wanted to go ahead and do that. And Gabby just kind of looked at her, and she's like, Claire, it just means it's how much money they make. And Claire's like, oh, okay, right. That makes a lot more sense. And so Pastor Jen could barely get the story out to me while she was laughing because Claire wasn't familiar with the term net worth of an individual, and she was very concerned with how okay everyone was about the celebrity slave trade that was supposedly happening. So it was a funny kind of story, but we can kind of experience that far beyond the realm of vocabulary, right? Sometimes we get really familiar in our relationships as well, and relationships that at one point brought a lot of life and energy to us can sometimes just become kind of stale and kind of old, and we lose some of that initial feeling with it. Are you familiar with the phrase, familiarity breeds contempt? Right? It first showed up in a work of literature over 600 years ago because it's just so common to the human experience. And so on a Sunday when we're talking about both Palm Sunday and water baptisms, there's probably all kinds of different people watching with us today, worshiping with us today, right? So some of you might be like me. I have had a privilege of growing up in the church and growing up knowing and having a personal relationship with Jesus, which has been amazing. I'm so grateful for that. But sometimes when that's the case, we kind of become really familiar with those things, don't we? And in the process of doing that, maybe we forget not only what they actually mean, but what they meant to us originally. Some of you, I hope, are here today, and maybe you don't know anything about Jesus. Maybe you're still checking out this whole church thing, and maybe you're feeling kind of skeptical about the whole thing in general. And let me just honestly tell you, I am so happy you're here. Whether you're joining us on our online campus or here in person, I hope you continue to come. I hope you feel safe and have a place to ask your questions to not only people here or other people in your life, but to God himself. We just really want you to keep coming back. And so on a day when we get to celebrate these things, I just want to challenge you, if you're here today, to just, if you've made that decision, just remember your baptism. Let's think about that day. Let's think about that moment. Let's think about that decision in a brand new way. And again, if you haven't made that yet, just follow along with me, and let's just dig into this story a little bit more, which will hopefully be meaningful to you. So we're going to turn to a passage in the Old Testament in 2 Kings chapter 5. So a little background on this, if you're unfamiliar with the story. This takes place about 800 years before Jesus came on the scene. But the cool part about the Bible is it's a whole big story, right? It's a collection of smaller stories, but it's all telling the story about God's amazing redemption plan. So many things in this story are all just pointing to Jesus and what he's doing. So as we're reading that, just kind of think about that as we're going through things. So there's a couple main characters in the story. The main one is Naaman. And Naaman is a guy who's got a lot going for him, okay? So he's actually not from the land of Israel. He is from Syria, and it was actually one of Israel's enemies at that point. They had actually just been in a pretty brutal conflict with them. And so it's interesting that that's who is one of the main characters in this story. And Naaman's got a lot going for him. Like I said, he's got a lot of money. He's got a great job. He's probably like a prime minister. He reports directly to the king. He seems to have a family that loves him and supports him. Really, he just had this one problem, but it was a pretty big problem. Naaman had leprosy. So if you're not familiar with leprosy, this was at the time really a death sentence. It was a physical leprosy that happened to you. It was a bacterial infection that would just very slowly spread throughout your body. So it was a really prolonged death sentence. And what it would do is as it would spread throughout your body, it starts to impact your nerve endings. And so it can ultimately start to lead to disfigurement. It can lead to paralysis and ultimately death. But even beyond just those physical implications, because leprosy was contagious upon close contact, it had a ton of just social and emotional complications to it. You had to live isolated. You couldn't have close physical contact with someone else. And so just imagine just the emotional weight that you're also carrying with this. Leprosy impacted every single area of your life. Now, here's the thing I really want to challenge you on, because I think we can all also be familiar with a kind of, maybe you can't see it from the outside of leprosy, but it's a spiritual leprosy of the heart. I want you to think about it. It's not, like I said, you can't see it from the outside, but it's probably even more insidious because it's spreading inside of you, and many times you might not even be aware of it. But just like physical leprosy, it's going to impact you every single way of your life. It's going to impact you physically, relationally, mentally, emotionally. It's going to have that kind of impact that we might more commonly refer to this spiritual leprosy as sin. So whenever you hear this story talking about this physical leprosy today, I want you to also just think about this picture of this spiritual leprosy. Now, if I were to ask you, even people who might not have a church background, to just tell me what sin is, I think most people could probably come up with a pretty simple definition, or at the very least, just start giving examples, right? And you're probably going to start thinking of examples like murder or theft or adultery, like those kind of really big sins. And it's true, right? Those are sins that very obviously are going to devastate so many people that are impacted by them. But I think the danger in just thinking that way is that sometimes we can miss some of these more benign sins. And this spiritual leprosy can start damaging the nerve endings of our conscience. And we can stop being aware that it's even happening, but it's happening and it's impacting us just the same with even some of these more benign sins, which is actually the case with Naaman. That's one of the things I like about this story. Naaman's actually not that terrible of a guy. As you're reading the story, he's actually seems pretty okay, but he has one major issue of spiritual leprosy in his heart that we just call pride. So pride is a funny thing, right? Because we're very quick to recognize it in other people. Sometimes it takes us a little longer to recognize it in ourselves. If you don't know me well, I'm a pretty, overall, I think, cool-headed person. I don't tend to get really angry about things, but if I do, usually I can name it in one of three areas. It's either going to be an issue of injustice, an issue of lying, or an issue of arrogance or pride. As a side note, I would like to point out that all of those things can be characterized by the New England Patriots. I'm just saying. So anyway, it's really amazing to notice in Naaman's life that this pride is there. And look what C.S. Lewis says about pride overall in this quote from Mere Christianity. He says, "There is one vice of which no man in the world is free, which everyone in the world loathes when he sees it in someone else, and of which hardly any people, except Christians, ever imagine that they are guilty themselves. There is no fault which makes a man more unpopular, and no fault which we are more unconscious of in ourselves. The vice I am talking of is pride or self-conceit, and the virtue opposite to it in Christian morals is called humility." So in this story, Naaman is steeped with this leprosy of the heart, this sin called pride. And so we're going to see what lengths God goes to today to not only heal him of his physical leprosy, but he wants to heal him of the spiritual leprosy as well. He wants to bring total and complete healing and wholeness to his life. And so I want you to do just what we talked about at the very beginning. If you are joining us today and you've made that decision to follow Jesus and to be water baptized, let's just pause throughout this message and let's remember your baptism. Remember your baptism. And the first way that we're going to do that is to remember who you were. Remember who you were. Who were you before you met Jesus? What kind of spiritual leprosy was impacting your life in every way? Maybe it was something really, really big and noticeable. Maybe it was addictions or dishonest business practices or other things that were hurting people, and maybe it was just pride. Just kind of think about that today and think about who you were before you met Jesus. And if you are joining us today and you haven't made that decision yet, I challenge you to just pause and just take an inventory of your heart and life and be really honest about maybe some areas that you can recognize that you're falling short and it's really impacting those around you. So back to the story. We're going to kind of pick up and we're going to see what happens to Naaman because he's got these two big problems, right? He has leprosy and he has this spiritual leprosy of pride. So look at verse 2 with me. Now, the Syrians on one of their raids had carried off a little girl from the land of Israel, and she worked in the service of Naaman's wife. She said to her mistress, "Would that my Lord were with the prophet who is in Samaria. He would cure him of his leprosy." So Naaman went in and told his Lord, "Thus and so spoke the girl from the land of Israel." And the king of Syria said, "Go now, and I will send a letter to the king of Israel." So he went, taking with him 10 talents of silver, 6,000 shekels of gold, and 10 changes of clothing. Okay, so look at this. There's this little girl. She's probably between the ages of 10 to 14. And she was from the nation of Israel. Remember that Syria was in this battle with the place in Israel where she was from in Samaria. And most likely, because Syria won, she probably saw all of her village or family killed or enslaved. And she herself was enslaved and now working in the home of this man that led the army that did that. So can you possibly think of a more unlikely character that would be the key to Naaman's salvation and healing here? I mean, if anybody had reason to not forgive Naaman, to not help him, it was this little girl, right? No one would blame her for that. But she chose to forgive. She chose something different. And how do I know that she did that? Well, because look at her words. Look how she spoke of Naaman. In another translation, it says, "If only my master would see the prophet in Samaria," or "I wish that my master would go see the prophet in Samaria." She's speaking words of love. And only forgiveness can produce the fruit of love. Bitterness can never produce that. You know, I'm sure it wasn't a flippant decision that she made to forgive Naaman. I'm sure it wasn't something that just happened overnight magically. It was a choice that she had to make over and over and over again. And it cost her something. It cost her a lot because forgiveness is never free. Some of us have heard us mention, Brad and I mentioned a couple different times that back last year in May, when we were several months into quarantine, we drove down to Virginia and bought a puppy because it just seemed like the right thing to do at the time. And so we bought a puppy who is now just an amazing member of our family, and he is 100% Black Labrador Retriever and 100% puppy with lots of energy who doesn't realize that he now weighs over 70 pounds. Like, he is very fast. He is very strong. And a couple weeks ago, Brad took him down to the lakes to just kind of walk and play. And in a series of unfortunate events, Fletcher got away from Brad when he saw some kids off in the field in the distance playing soccer. They might as well have been like a matador, like waving the red cape to the bull, because Fletcher sees the soccer ball and he takes off. And he successfully both catches and kills the soccer ball that the poor innocent children were playing with in the park. So Brad's running over. He's trying to put the leash on Fletcher. He's trying to help the crying children who are there because of their soccer ball dying. And he's profusely apologizing to the family, like, please let me pay for it. Let me send you money on Venmo or the Cash App. And the mom looks at him and says, hey, aren't you Pastor Brad? And he was like, yeah. And she's like, oh, we're not going to make Pastor Brad pay for the soccer ball. Don't worry about it. We'll be fine. And I actually got to meet her last week. Coincidentally, her name is also Leah, and she was here with her cute little boy. And Leah, thank you for your grace in extending that to our family. We are very grateful. But here's the thing, right? When Leah and her family chose to forgive us, the cost of that soccer ball didn't just dissolve into the air, right? Somebody had to absorb the cost of that soccer ball. And in this case, it was Leah and her family that said, we're going to just absorb that cost and just forgive you of it. You don't have to pay that back anymore. That's always the case of forgiveness. It always costs something. This little girl, she didn't have any choice, right? And what happened to her, what happened to her family. But look at this. This is the really beautiful part. Jesus, he did choose to leave his Father. He did choose to come and be a servant to people. He chose to speak love and forgiveness to the very people that were causing him pain. He chose to absorb the cost of that spiritual leprosy, and he chose to forgive me, to forgive you, to forgive all of us in a way that's so far beyond that we can imagine. Because, see, the greater the injustice that happens, the greater the cost of the forgiveness. And so I know so many of you are here today, and you're dealing with a lot of more injustice that's happened to you than a busted soccer ball. And that's a really real thing. And so I just encourage you, just as we can kind of look at this story and see the choice that the little girl made to trust the very God that she was pointing Naaman to just make that choice, because you're going to, experience incredible freedom in it, because Jesus has already absorbed that cost for us. So we can be delivered from all of the weight of that. And so I just want to encourage you to think about kind of this second step today. When we think about the little girl who pointed us, the beautiful part is, who's the real hero in this story? It's not the big, strong man Naaman, and it's not even the amazing man of God, prophet Elisha. It's this little girl. She's the picture of Jesus, right? She's what we would call the suffering servant, which is a name that people give to Jesus. And so who is that person in your life that pointed you to Jesus? As you remember your baptism today, think about this second step of who brought you here. Who is that person that spoke into you, that pointed you? Maybe it was a praying parent or a friend from school, or maybe you don't even know who it was because it was somebody who bought a billboard or a book or a television show that ministered to you in that moment. Who brought you here, and who sacrificed? Who absorbed the cost of what that meant to bring you here today? And again, if you are joining us and you don't have that relationship with Jesus right now, well, how are you here? Think about that. What brought you here today physically in this room or joining us online? Who brought you here? And thank God for that person in this moment. So let's continue on. For the sake of time, I'm going to kind of paraphrase the last part of the story, but I really encourage you to go back later and read it. It's a really, really great story. So Naaman's leaving with this huge entourage of servants, right? And probably about like $80,000 to $100,000 worth of goods between the silver and the gold and the designer clothes. And so he is going, and he goes straight for the king because important people go to other important people. And the king sees him, and the king starts getting all upset because the king's like, I don't know how to cure leprosy, and is this some kind of trick that you're just trying to trick us into attacking us again? And Naaman finally, somehow while he's there, Elisha the prophet hears about it, and he says, tell Naaman to come to my house. So picture with me, Naaman's going with his big entourage, right? He's leaving the big fancy palace, and he's going and he's traveling with all of his amazing prizes, and he's going to this simple house of this man of God. And it's very simple, to the point where Naaman, he's not going in there. This is way below him, okay? So he's just waiting outside for something amazing to happen with this man of God. And so remember, Naaman's got kind of two issues of leprosy going on, right? He's got this physical leprosy, but he has this pride in his heart. And that kind of puts this next part in context. So look what Elisha does for Naaman. Elisha doesn't come out either. He's like, I'm not going to come out and see you either. So Elisha sends his servant out, and his servant says, okay, Naaman, if you want to be cured of your physical leprosy, then you got to go walk over to the Jordan River, take a bath in it 7 times, and then you're going to be clean. Okay, there's 3 main problems with this plan. Okay, problem number 1, it's a long way away. Okay, it's going to be a couple hours hike to get to the Jordan River from where they were, and he already traveled all this way. Number 2, the Jordan River is gross. Okay, Naaman's used to some really beautiful, pristine rivers in his country. Not here. The Jordan River probably made the Schuylkill look like the Gulf of Mexico. Okay, like it was gross. And the third problem with it is that anyone could do this plan, right? This is no like, fetch me the broom of the wicked witch of the West, okay? Like there's no heroism to this. It's not difficult. He basically just told Naaman to go take a bath in a dirty river. And Naaman responded, probably how you would imagine he would respond. He was furious. He was so mad. And do you see why? It's because the cure to his physical leprosy hit at the very core of his spiritual leprosy. And Naaman almost let this flare-up of his spiritual leprosy of pride prevent him from receiving his physical healing. But again, God raises up this servant, and he lets his servant come in, and the servant's like, look, buddy, if this were some big, bad mission impossible, don't you think you would have at least tried it? Like, what's the harm in at least trying this? What do you have to lose? And somehow that logic got through to Naaman, so he goes and he does it, and guess what? He's cured. Miracle of miracles. It actually says when he came out, his skin was like that of a little boy. He was born again. Isn't that awesome? And what's also awesome is that you can see that his heart was changed in the process, because what he does next is incredible. He walks all the way back to Elisha. And look with me in verse 15. It says, then he returned to the man of God, he and all his company, and he came and stood there before him. And he said, behold, I know that there is no God in all the earth but in Israel. So accept now a present from your servant. But he said, as the Lord lives, before whom I stand, I will receive none. And he urged him to take it, but he refused. Then Naaman said, if not, please let there be given to your servant 2 mule loads of earth, for from now on your servant will not offer burnt offering or sacrifice to any god but the Lord. It's awesome, right? Naaman's going back with everything that he came with, but he's going back totally different. Naaman left his home with his entourage of servants, and now he's going back saying that he is Elisha's servant, and he is a servant of the Most High God. It's a really, really incredible thing. And that's the last thing that I want you to remember in remembering your baptism, is remember who you are right now. all those things that we remembered at the beginning, who you were, those things that identified your life, those good things, achievements and accomplishments, and the negative things, that sin in our lives, listen, they don't define you anymore. You are made new. You are born again. You are made totally clean, and you can identify totally and wholly as Jesus' servant, and that you're living your life for him. It's an amazing thing. And when we see people getting baptized today and the waters of baptism going over them, it's a symbol of what God has done in their heart, right? That clean heart that he has done inside, that's what we're going to see and celebrate when that happens. And listen, everybody, we are celebrating these baptisms. We have waited a year for that, so I don't want any golf clap. Like, you're going to cheer like Fletcher is chasing after your soccer ball. Like, we are going to celebrate, and it's going to be amazing. And if you're here today and you haven't made that choice yet, maybe you want to today. And I'm excited because we're going to have a chance in just a moment to pray a prayer to do just that. But listen, if you're not ready to do that yet, just keep coming back. Keep talking to people. Keep asking questions. You can click on a link right now online to pray with a prayer leader, or you can come and pray with someone here at church. We would love to keep talking to you. And most importantly, keep talking to God. Because as we can see in this story, he's got some pretty creative ways to draw people close to him. But I want you, as we're going to sing this song, take this moment to remember your baptism. Remember who you were. Remember who brought you here. Remember who you are. But there's one other group of people that I kind of want to talk to just before we do that. And listen, this might be the most important thing I say. So just lean in right here. Because remember that phrase that we talked about at the beginning, familiarity breeds contempt. You know, there might be some of you here that come to church almost every week. You're a part of either watching online or worshiping here in person, and you do it maybe because your family's always done it. Maybe because it kind of just makes you feel good. And it just seems like the right thing to do. Listen, if we're not careful, we can kind of just start getting into the routine of all those things and doing all of the right things for all of the wrong reasons. And we can lose sight and almost miss what Jesus has done right in front of us. There's actually one other time in the Bible when Naaman is mentioned, and it's in the book of Luke. And it's this time when Jesus goes back to his home church at the very beginning of his ministry. And he basically reads this passage in Isaiah and tells everyone, hey, this passage right here, this Messiah that it's talking about, it's me. And everybody, this is his home church, right? They're all like, what? Get out of here. Like, we know you, Jesus. Like, your dad's a carpenter. We're so familiar with you. There's no way that this is about you. And Jesus proceeds to then just tell them, like, listen, there's lots of people in the Old Testament, including this man Naaman, that were not part of the establishment, right? And that's precisely why God used them. And he's very pointedly saying, you could be from the right family, you could be doing all the right things, you could even be sitting in church at this very moment, and there's been plenty of people that's been the case, and they missed it. And Jesus' followers at that time, the people that were there in the church, they kind of wanted to kill him. They chased him out of there. They were so mad, and maybe that's how you're even feeling about me right now. But listen, please don't hear any condemnation in my voice. That's not at all what this is about. This is about that this can be your day. Don't let another day, don't let another week go by without you really making that choice to step into this moment and to let this be your day. That you get to, with all of your heart, step into what it means to just have that relationship and best friend relationship with Jesus. So let's just do that right now. Let's give anybody here today, watching online or here in the room, just a chance to pray. That prayer of salvation is what we call it. And it's just asking Jesus, it's acknowledging that we have that spiritual leprosy, that sin that separates us from him and everyone else. And so we're going to just ask him to forgive us. And so I encourage you right now, I'm going to lead you in a prayer just because I know sometimes it's hard to know where to start. And actually, I'm going to ask everyone in the room to join with us as we do that as a way to support people making that decision for the first time. So I'm going to lead you. You can just repeat after me wherever you're watching right now. Let's just pray together. Heavenly Father, thank you for loving me. I have this spiritual leprosy. I have this sin that has hurt so many people. It's hurt me. And most importantly, it's hurt you. I'm so sorry. I'm asking for your forgiveness. Thank you for dying on the cross for me. Thank you for absorbing the cost of my sin. I want to live my life for you. I am your servant. In Jesus' name, amen. Amen. That is incredible.